Today, I'm really excited to have a former client, but more importantly, a longtime friend in the space, friend Scott Shearin. Scott is the owner of Veteran Talent Advisors, also launching a new software application, which we'll dig in today. And we're also going to be digging into Scott's journey in battle with cancer, which is inspiring and informative. And, I just thank you, Scott, for coming up here today, share your story and be raw and real. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Excellent. Thanks, Donnie. And I hate that you say, I'm a former client. I know that's technically true. But I didn't discontinue our services with you because of the service that you performed or anything like that. It was just a kind of your point that you just brought up before. It was just a matter of circumstance and things that were going on. And, but Donnie is the best in this field.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't get fired. Okay, cool.
No, absolutely not.
Awesome. Well, Scott, it's and for those of you that are watching, Scott was one of the very, very first people I had the pleasure of working with in this industry. And a lot of the things that I developed with the Relevant Recruiter method, which didn't even exist when Scott and I worked together, actually came from a lot of the work that we did together and me kind of really learning and exploring this industry. So for me, this is kind of like a coming full circle. And Scott, why don't you just share real quick with everybody, where are you located? What's the family life like and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm located in Cincinnati, Ohio. So, go Bengals. And I love saying that because, I'm just so accustomed all my life to having a horrible football team. And right. I've accepted that too. I'm cool with that as part of the identity being a Cincinnatian. And so now to be good again, it's like, hey, that's fantastic. Go right. Bengals. So we didn't choose this place and nothing against it. Cincinnati's terrific, from a cost of living standpoint. And it's low key and it's safe and, it's warm in the summers. But my wife and I were both born here. So we were both born and raised here. I've lived all over the place between the Marine Corps and also the corporate world has brought me into some different places. But we've always found our way back here. But it's really not about Cincinnati. It's about family. We've got kids and kids have grandparents, which are important in their lives. And grandparents are all here in Cincinnati. So every time I bring up to Bree, my wife, the fact that I would like to live somewhere warmer, we always kind of come back to that conversation. It's like, well, family's here right now, and maybe when the kids are grown, and maybe so. But at this time, we're here with littles, and it's a great town. So
love it. Now you brought up Cincinnati Bengals, so we have to just, since it's a relevant topic right now, who you got this weekend? Is it Bills or Bengals? What do you got? Where you're putting your money? Of course.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. The Bengals, of course. We are, honestly, I'm pretty sure we're the hottest team right now, aren't we, as far as consecutive wins? I think we're 10 in a row.
I think we're at 11 wins in a row. What are you guys at?
Okay. I think we're at like 10. Don't quote me. Maybe
9. Two of the hottest teams in football right now, for sure.
Yeah. So we're playing well. I'm confident. It's going to be weird, I think. I don't know. It's going to be awkward because of what happened that last week of the regular season. But man, it should be a good game. And if Buffalo wins, good for them. One of my best friends is from Buffalo. And kind of like me, navigating back to Cincinnati, he and his wife have navigated back to Buffalo. Mm-hmm. He's he's not old, but a former Apache pilot, from the military. And he's now a airline pilot. So he's all over the place, but they're back in Buffalo. So I'm sure that Greg will be texting me all afternoon. It'll be interesting.
Good friendly rival. It's funny because my best friend last year, Niners played the Cowboys. My best friend is a Cowboys fan. Last year, I flew out to Dallas to meet him.
Oh, nice.
This year, he's actually going to the game back in San Francisco with my pops. I flew out last week to watch the Niners and Seahawks, so I don't think I'll make it back out. But so I've got that rivalry with my good friend too. So those of you that are listening, there's your go ahead and put your money down for this weekend. There's your sports talk advice for the week right there from Donnie and Scott, a couple of sports experts. So
absolutely.
Scott, we were actually just kind of chit chatting before we went live here about your journey and first off, thank you for service time in the Marines. Tell us a little bit about that story about what got you into the Marine Corps and what how's that impacted your life a little bit? I know that's a little bit ago, right?
Yeah. Well, dude, it's funny because I sort of backed my way into the Marine Corps in a very similar way that I backed my way into the world of recruiting, and we can get into that in a minute too, if you want. But, I was not one of those guys in high school, because you know those guys. There's some guys in high school that they're headed for the military. You know what I mean? They're in junior ROTC. They're doing all these extracurricular activities, and they got a whole plan, and they know all the different specialties and what they're going to do and all this stuff. That was not me. That was not me at all. Believe it or not, man, I'm a former hardcore punk rocker. So I was a jock in middle school. I played football. I continued to play baseball. I was a catcher. But then a couple of my friends, including myself, kind of went towards that punk rock era. You know what I mean? The Misfits, Danzig, Sam Hain, you know, any Dead Kennedys, guys like that. And grew the hair long, and the baseball coach was like, you can't have long hair. And I'm like, well, then I'm not playing baseball, you know, because I was too cool for that, you know? So by the time I was a junior in high school, I'd quit all sports, had hair halfway down my back, going to punk rock concerts on the weekend, which I'm sure my mom loved. And, you know, being in the mosh pits, you know, people look at me now and they're like, that's not you, you know, but it is, though. It is me.
I still get into a mosh pit here and there. I mean,
see, awesome, man. I know this is totally off track, but the only concert I ever regretted was a band I'd never heard of, and my buddy, who's one of the partners with Climb, one of the businesses that we're starting up now, also a punk rocker. He got me to go to this Guar concert. I'd never heard of Guar in my life. I don't know if you've heard of them or know who they are. I know
Guars, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did not. I was a teenager. I just bought a brand new black leather jacket. And of course, like every concert, I'm right up and as close as I can get to the stage, you know. And these guys come out in full costume, you know, and I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. And then all of a sudden there's like, you know, fake blood everywhere. And I was like, what the hell, you know, in my brand new leather jacket, you know, I was furious. But that was the only concert that really kind of blew my mind, and I really regretted going to. And the music wasn't that good either. So no offense to any Guar fans out there. No. So anyway, I started college early on, you know, the high school had a post-secondary option. I had enough credits to graduate early. So I did. Skipped my senior year, went down to college. I was going to study political science and go to law school, you know, and it didn't work out too well because I was, you know, 17 and I just wasn't super mature, and, you know, I was partying a lot and stuff like that. So, which is really rare for a 17-year-old. So rare. It's so rare. And found myself back home, you know, up in the suburbs, and kind of feeling sorry for myself, and big goatee, you know, and this guy knocked on the door, and opened the door. He had stripes all the way down his arm. Gunnery Sergeant Allred. I can't believe I still remember his name. And he was just like, you know, hey, interested. See if you were interested in talking about the Marine Corps. And I'm shutting the door on him. Just like, no, thank you, sir. Thank you. You know, he's like, well, hey, I just was curious if you'd be interested in taking a test. And that, Donnie, that did it. And I'm like, really? I'm like, a test? I'm like, I love tests. I've always loved tests. And I'm like, yeah, come in. And, you know, my parents were there. They were off working. It was just me in the house. And so I let this guy in, and he gave me this pre-military entrance exam, this pre-ASVAB. And I'm just like, I absolutely love tests, and took it. And of course, they used that then to play on my ego. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, you scored perfect on this test, and you can do any job in the Marine Corps. You know? So next thing you know, man, I was signing up, and that's how I got into this obscure field of cryptography, which I didn't know what that was, but my test scores led me to that field, and encoding and decoding, you know, messages on the Intel side. And so it's a weird journey. It was not expected. Yeah. It was not part of the plan. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine my life any other way, you know? Yeah. So I ended up doing 13 total years, 8 years enlisted. And then after college, I actually went back to college. You know, it was super easy later after you know, being beaten by the Marine Corps for a little bit of boot camp. I'm sure college becomes a breeze at that point. Yeah, super easy. College was a breeze, and went back as an officer for 5 years, and so a total of 13, 8 years enlisted and 5 years commission. Awesome. And that's also kind of, you know, you just mentioned kind of how you backed into the recruiting space, and you know, when we first started working together, that was something you're passionate about, is helping veterans, you know, find opportunities after, you know, they're done with service. And that, I don't want to speak out of term here, but that's what really inspired you to create, you know, Veteran Talent Advisors, correct? Yeah, well, and it did. And so, and again, every store is a little more complex, you know? So, and that's how I found my way into the recruiting world was, so when I studied finance and economics in college, and because I watched Wall Street as a teenager and Charlie Sheen. You know, I'm like that I'll be that. That'll be me. You know, I'll just because I hated political science. By the way, I hated that.
Right.
Had to change my major, change it to finance, because at least in finance there's actually provable right answers and wrong answers. You didn't have to debate with professors and stuff like that. You know,
right.
So that's what led me to finance and economics. Got my finance degree. Was going to be a stockbroker. Got out of college. Did become a stockbroker. Got my Series 766, all that stuff. And a year and a half into it, man, I mean, Donnie, I just hated it. I hated it so much, you know? Right. So, and again, no offense to any stockbrokers out there, but you know, when you're in your 20s and you get your license into that industry, nobody, you know, the Donnie Guptons of the world and the Scott Shearins today of the world, man, we're not handing over our life savings and our investments to some 20-year-old kid that, you know what I mean? Even that you got out of the Marine Corps in college, you know, you're not doing that. So the only way really that you can make a substantial amount of money is to sell life insurance, you know, in addition to trying to build your securities practice, but you're basically channeling it through life insurance commissions to kind of pay the bills, if you will. Right. And that just ate at me, man. So it was like every single week, you know, night after night, sitting down at kitchen tables with my, you know, close friends and family and being like, hey, Donnie, you know, beautiful family you got here. Do you know you're going to die, right? You know, and like having that conversation, man, it just crushed me. It crushed me totally. And so like after a year or so, I was really dragging. And one of the guys that was one of my first clients as a stockbroker was a guy named Drew Myers. And he's the guy who founded a veteran career fair company called Recruit Military. So he and I were both in the Marine Corps together. And we were at Paul Brown Stadium, you know, where the Bengals play. Well, whatever they call it now, I can't remember. Right. And I was like, we were just having a beer and just doing a networking event, you know. And I'm like, he's like, so how's everything going, man? And since it was Drew and we're friends, I felt like I could open up to him. And I was like, Drew, I was like, I hate this, man. I hate it so much. And here's why. And he was like, look, you know, I have this a company that I work with. They're a technology recruiting company based out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They're looking, well, actually they weren't, but they were trying to penetrate Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So they were looking for a guy that had was a sales guy that had a military background that could go up there and just work with all those defense integrators, the CACIs and the Bearing Points and Northrop Grumman's. And that's me. I'm a sales guy with a military background, you know, and honestly, at that point in time, Donnie, I did not know that the world of recruiting was a thing. I just thought the only recruiters I knew were military recruiters. You know, I didn't know that people made a living recruiting for companies. Right. I had no clue. So it was totally news to me. But that company, Tech Systems, which you're probably familiar with, a big IT staffing firm, they hired me and sent me to Dayton. And I had a great time, man, because not only was I a sales guy with a military background, but I was a Marine. Right. And that's an Air Force base. So all of a sudden, I can become the butt of every joke. You know what I mean? Oh, you stupid Marine, you know, all these Marines are idiots, you know, and that was fine with me. I'm totally cool with that. If you're going to buy services from me and sign a contract, I'll be the dumb Marine all day long, you know? So made a lot of friends up there, did that for about 3 years. And then I got a phone call from Sara Lee, the big food company. And I just thought how intriguing it sounded to be on the other side of the coin. I'd been in this third-party world now for 3 years, trying to sell to big companies. Right. Granted, not food companies, defense integrators, but I was like, you know, it'd be kind of cool to, you know, to be on the other side of this industry. And so I joined Sara Lee, and I started working on. They recruited me to head up their IT recruiting, but then I also kind of built their military recruiting program with the help of Drew and stuff like that. And and I did that, you know, for a long time, and so that's what got us up to Chicago. We lived in Chicago, that's where Sara Lee was headquartered, and did that up until Sara Lee went out of business in 2012. So now I know people still buy Sara Lee, but if you look at the back of the packaged goods, you'll actually see that all those brands are owned by different companies, you know? So we went through a long line of divestitures and divesting all of our various brands for a couple of years. And I eventually got sold like a free agent out of that, out of one of those transactions. So, yeah. But so yeah, none of this, you know, none of this is like a direct path, but it was after I got sold to Bimbo Bakeries down in Mexico, where they were like, you know, hey, we've never had a head of recruiting before. We have 100,000 employees globally, but we've never had like somebody specifically in charge of recruiting. So it's great that we have you now. And we're going to, we can bring you down here to Mexico City and we can just go nuts, And that's when my wife and I were pregnant with our youngest. He's 10 now, which is crazy. And we just thought, man, having a baby, Mexico City, it's like that. I don't know if that's the right thing,
Yeah.
So, so I ended up putting my resignation in, and I had 2 offers. One to be the head of recruiting for Sam Adams, which is cool because I like beer. I still like beer. And Sam Adams makes some pretty good beer, and so I thought I was going to take that, but then the more I interviewed with that team, I was able to basically correlate all the different people I was meeting on their recruiting team with the same personalities that I had at Sara Lee, And I was like, well, that's Rebecca, that's Steve, that, And I'm like, I'm just going to be doing the exact same thing with essentially the exact same people. And that's when Drew stepped in, the guy that got me into recruiting all those years ago. And he was like, man, why don't you just come back to Cincinnati, join Recruit Military? When we first started this back in the 90s, we were a recruiting company before we turned into a career fair company. And he was like, we'll hire you a bunch of recruiters and we'll just take over the veteran recruiting space. And I'm like, well, that sounds good. So we did that, and that got us back to Cincinnati. And 6 months into that, Drew sent me a text one morning. It's like 6 a.m. And he was like, hey, can you meet me for breakfast? I got to talk to you about something. So I met him, and he was like, look, I got an offer from a venture capital firm. I never could have expected this or predicted this, but it's 10 digits and I'm going to take it, And so I'm like, okay. So still, obviously, I have no hard feeling. I'm still close friends with Drew, but a new board comes in, new CEO, and it became apparent right away that they weren't going to invest any energy or time into the professional services side of that business, the recruiting side. They were just going to look to enhance the foundational career fair part of the business and then turn the company over for a profit in 5 years, which they did. And good for them. That's amazing. But that, after all the divestitures that we had just gone through with Sara Lee, that gave me an idea. I talked to my wife, and we sat down one night and agreed to it. So we approached the board and offered to divest just the recruiting division, spin it off, and become its own separate entity that I could run it like a recruiting company and own it. And that's the genesis of Veteran Talent Advisors. We're the former recruiting department of Recruit Military. And then I had the inspiration to do that through all of my work with Sara Lee. And that's when you and I met, back when I was just splitting off. Right. And one of my big drivers to partner with you was that when I first split off, 100% of my clients were shared clients with Recruit Military. So I also shared revenue with everything I did and placed for them. And we had a fair split. I mean, there was no animosity there whatsoever. It worked out fine. But as I was thinking about the future, I was like, look, I need to hire people, and I need to get our own client base. Right. And that's what got me with you. And I thought our work together was very fruitful and very beneficial. I think, we to this day, here I am in 2022. I have not had a shared client with Recruit Military in years and years and years. So it's been a long time. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, man. It's fun to hear the full story. I know I've gotten bits and pieces over the year, but that's really cool how it's all multiple companies, multiple different things not going your way, and then ultimately, boom, here, that leads to you, starting a business, which, most times I think people think it's like a glorious road, and it's almost kind of like back into a quarter a little bit into like, hey, but that's cool. It kind of gives you that extra push to go out and play.
No, I've always known I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was, my father was, my grandfather was, but I never knew exactly how I was going to get there or what I'd be doing. But to your point, I mean, you navigate life, and a series of obstacles and various aspects of suffering and failures are going to confront you. And it's just how you choose to respond to those things. And that's going to basically write your story, Right. So,
and you guys are still running Veteran Talent Advisors, everything's still kind of operation full speed with that business.
Yeah, it is. And so we downsized significantly, back in 2018, intentionally for health reasons. I know you mentioned that for a second. And we haven't really ever gotten back into that format of aggressive growth, like with respect to hiring a bunch of recruiters or stuff like that. But there's various reasons for that too. Number one, part of it is we're happy. I hate using the word comfortable, you know what I mean? Because that's almost like a dangerous word.
Right.
But you know, we're well situated, you know, and a lot of times when you start hiring a lot of folks, as you know, I mean, there's a lot of risks involved, you know, so it's sometimes you have to figure out whether or not you're in a position to take those risks, you know?
Right. Right.
It's kind of like bringing on new clients too. And I know your business is centered around, you know, attracting and developing new clients for companies, but there's risks involved in that too, you know? So, you know, when you have an established base of very well formulated relationships and strong clients that always interview the people that you send, that hire at least some of them, you know, and that pay their invoices, it's like, that's gold, man. And that's, you've proven that over time. And so sometimes with new clients, especially if you decide to take some of your focus and attention away from your current clients and focus on your new ones, what you need to do to try to establish good relationships. You know, sometimes you end up, sometimes new clients don't always interview people, no matter how many you send. Sometimes they don't pay their bills, and sometimes they, you know what I mean? So there's always these trade-offs, man. And, and we started working on that startup as well, which we can get into at some point if you want. But, and that's really taken some core focus away also from, you know, hey, do we want to hire a bunch of recruiters and just move forward in the recruiting space? So,
well, I'd love to go down the path of, you know, your health journey and that kind of story, because I think there's a lot of things that you shared with me kind of beforehand here that would be valuable to the audience, of signs and things like that, you know. As much as you're willing to share, man. I mean, share a little bit about your battle with cancer and that whole bit.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, and I had to run this, I promised this friend of mine that I would do this fundraising campaign a couple of years ago. So I was already, it turns out I suck at raising funds. You know what I mean? So I'm really good at like producing value and selling the value that you produce, but I'm really bad at asking people for donations. You know what I mean? It's not comfortable for me. But you know, I did have practice at talking about the journey and sharing that story. And you know, there could be a lot of people that find value in that too, because a lot of it comes down to work-life balance and focusing on the things that are the most important. The family and your health are two of those things that I think are more important than even the business. And that's not to say that you need the business for your family and your health. So it all works together. But yeah, I know I mentioned to you earlier that I can really trace symptoms back that I can associate with the cancer battle all the way back, probably as early as 2009 or 10. So when I was still with Sarah Lee. But you know, a lot, especially as just being a regular dude, it's easy to just, you know, talk yourself out of noticing things.
Normal, like, brush it under the table.
Right, it's fine, whatever. In a couple of days, I won't notice it anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's fine. And then there was also, I was pursuing a little bit up in Chicago because I didn't have any established doctors in Chicago because, you know, all my doctors were in Cincinnati. Well, I had one family doctor was about it. And so I didn't really have any set relationships up there. And then I went to a dermatologist up there. You know, my wife, good on her. She's the one it's always your wife, right? Who's holding you accountable, like get to the doctor, check these things out, you know? And that ended up not working out well in this one single instance, because I ended up at a dermatologist because she's like, you really should get these things checked out on your skin. And this guy found something. And when I signed the paperwork, when you go in, they're like, hey, what's your family history? And of course, right there on the paperwork, I had to be like, yeah, my dad had melanoma. It spread and it's got into his brain, had 4 brain tumors. He passed away when I was 26. And so of course this dermatologist sees that and he was just like, oh, you have melanoma. It's right here in this little patch of your back that you've never seen before. I'll just cut it out, bill your insurance company. And of course I'm just like, yeah, man, you know, shave that piece off, you know, no big deal. Now you might be thinking like, this is a totally irrelevant story, but it's not, man. And here's why. Because when I left Sarah Lee in 2012, I lost that life insurance. Right here we come back to life insurance, man, which I hate. And then that's also when I resigned my commission in the military. So I also lost my military life insurance. So then here I go as a regular dude out into the open market to have life insurance for my family. And what do you think all the life insurance providers say now?
No.
Like, oh, you had melanoma. Yeah. Right. So they're like, oh, and not only did you have melanoma, but your dad died of melanoma, you know? And I'm like, well, crap, so now all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot of symptoms. They're not symptoms of melanoma at all, man. They're different kinds of symptoms, lumps, underarms, neck, all kinds of different symptoms were coming up. And I'm like, I did not want to pursue an official diagnosis of anything that I thought might be more serious until in my mind, I solidified and acquired a life insurance policy. Because I figured, if I get diagnosed with something else that's serious, then just forget it. I'll never get a life insurance policy the rest of my life, which is true, by the way. And so that's really what compelled me to further ignore things. And it wasn't until I think about 2012 when there was a lump in my groin that was so large. It was so large that I'm a former bodybuilder and weightlifter, so I did a lot of weightlifting. Was in the gym all the time. And I just thought it was a hernia because that's just, in my mind, I'm like, oh, obviously I just, pulled that, got a hernia. So I actually did expose that to the family doctor, and he, felt in there. He's like, man, that's not a hernia. He's like, I think that's a lymph node. And I'm like, oh, no, I didn't even know at that time that there were lymph nodes in the groin, I just thought those things were like in the neck and stuff. And so he was like, look, it's probably not anything to be totally worried about. It's not enormous, but obviously you can feel it. And he was like, let's just keep an eye on it. And so, of course, me trying to pursue life insurance, I take that and run with it like, oh, cool, it's nothing to worry about. Doctor said so. So I was able to push that off a couple of more years, and other lumps would come by, and we did do a couple of needlepoint biopsies that kept coming back clear. So, and of course, when that came back clear again, like a normal dude, it's like, oh, cool, it's clear.
Yep.
Nothing to worry about. Yeah, I don't know. No big deal. And at that time, I was focused on building the business, getting that thing up and running. That was 2014. We went into business. So kind of right at the beginning of all this stuff. And so it wasn't until things got real bad right after we moved into our new house that we built. But then that summer, right when things were getting real bad, I was trying to clear, the builder left one of those old barbed wire fences in the woods behind our house. And of course, I wanted my son to be out there playing in the woods. So I wanted to get that barbed wire fence out of there. So I got that out, but I ended up with a terrible case of poison ivy. And so I got prescribed a steroid for that poison ivy. And as soon as I took that steroid, man, all those lumps, so many lumps, I'm not going to lie. They just went away like magic, with that steroid. And I'm like, oh, sweet. And so again, that was another year. And I'm like, oh, good, I'm good, man. It's whatever. And but then I'd say maybe not a year, but maybe 8, 9, 10 months later, like, dude, everything was back. All through the neck, all through the underarm, groin, both sides of the groin now.
Worse now or same?
Worse. After the steroid made them all, when they came back, it was even worse. And now it was so bad that they were even in my cheeks. So there's lymph nodes up here, by the way, in your cheek. I didn't know that either. And they're popping out. So that's like really visible, And my wife was like, Bree's like, this is it. We got to do something. And so I was at her ear, nose, and throat guy, and he was like, look, man, he was like, you're a disabled vet. He's like, why don't you just, you might be scared of the VA or whatever. Why don't you just go down to the VA, manage your costs, you're already a permanently disabled veteran. And so I went down to the VA, and their ENT doctor actually carved one of those lymph nodes out of my neck instead of just doing the needlepoint. And that's when they're like, oh yeah, this is pretty far along. You've got stage 3 aggressive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. We basically need to start chemo like immediately, like tomorrow, if we can, so that was the end of 2018. And, my wife still tells a story of when we got that phone call with the diagnosis and how stoic I was. But Donnie, man, I mean, like I knew, like I knew. So it wasn't like it was a surprise to me. And I didn't know like necessarily the names of the cancers or you know what I'm saying? But like you in
your gut, you knew something was something was wrong. Yeah. You know your body.
Exactly. So, so that's when, we really decided to take a turn with VTA. We parted ways with a couple of staff members just to try to, reduce payroll. We got rid of the office building, started working from home, which sort of magically made us prepared for COVID, which we didn't realize was like a year and a half away. So everybody was working from home. That guy that I was telling you about, who was the airline pilot, he was a recruiter with us, and a sales and recruiter, working both sides of the desk. But he ended up, taking a position that he had always wanted as a commercial airline pilot. So he left as well. I hated to see him go. And now we were all, working remote and kind of just focused on the core business, the core clients. And at some points in time, it's just myself and my wife. And now occasionally we'll partner with some third-party sources, like third-party contract recruiters that want to work on some of the stuff that we have. Split commissions with them, obviously, all day long. No big deal. But we haven't brought in, since that time, since the cancer diagnosis, we haven't brought on any W-2 employees.
Right.
So.
Right. Got it. So you guys just kind of maintained as a result of that. But just for the audience listening, you're a couple years in the clear, correct?
Yeah. So the chemo they did for 6 months, handled that pretty well. And granted, I know I've heard all the horror stories that chemo today is not like chemo 20 years ago. You know what I mean?
Right.
I had a little nausea, but it was no big deal. And I was actually tired, which was weird for me. I'm one of those guys that, 3-4 hours of sleep a night is perfectly fine. It's my whole life, except for maybe when I was a teenager. But and then I was actually sleeping like 7 or 8 hours a night. So my wife was like, "Oh, you're actually sleeping like a normal human being," And I don't sleep as much as I did now when I was on chemo, but still I sleep more than I used to. So that was only 6 months, and then they put me on a 2-year regimen of immunotherapy, which was not too bad at all. I mean, you just had to tolerate the day-long infusion treatments down at the VA.
Right.
And I was I was out of place down there in the chemo room. Most of those guys are just Vietnam guys. You know what I mean? And they've all got their pull down TVs all right next to each other, all turned up on full blast, watching 70s programming, what I mean? And I'll just put my headphones in, listen to a podcast or something. But yeah, so it wasn't too bad though. There were some issues with bleeding and stuff like that, but it was fine. So I think my last, when did I stop that? Was summer of 21. Yeah. Summer of 21 was my last immunotherapy treatment, but I had been scanning cancer-free a year before I stopped treatment. So
awesome, man. Well, thank you for sharing your story and your journey. And of course, we're happy you kicked the shit out of that battle there.
Yeah.
So along that though, that also kind of what got going, the other business that we haven't really talked about that you've kind of alluded to is Climb.ai. How did that kind of come along throughout this journey?
So Climb.ai, and basically you could say that it's a tool that I dreamt up while I was with Sarah Lee. So while I'm with Sarah Lee managing, a large Fortune 500 TA budget, basically, and all the tools that we use and work with, and basically I was frustrated with essentially how ineffective the majority of those tools are. Right. And not just from a recruiter standpoint, but also from a job seeker standpoint, So I just didn't think any of those tools, any of the job boards that are out there really did a very effective job at, bringing the right people to the right roles or bringing the right recruiters to the right candidates. So I'd come up with a different way in my mind of constructing a tool or a solution. And then that just kind of got shelved mentally for a long period of time until I joined this CEO group in Cincinnati. And I ended up meeting Chuck, who you met on our call. So Chuck was he was the founder of a company called Intelligence, which is a large SAP consulting firm. They're still in business, but Chuck sold that company, I think maybe, don't quote me, on 12, 15 years ago, something like that. He has now bought another SAP consulting firm based out of Toronto, but they do work globally. And so he and I became friends, and just one of these random coffees or lunches or beer, I can't remember, I just started telling him about this idea. And this has been a while ago now. And he was like, "Man, it's we should do this, And I'm like, okay. So we started on it. At first it was just Chuck and myself. We had a couple of, and he's a career IT guy, though he's not, a hardcore heads down developer.
Right.
and we need a lot of help in that regard. So we pursued a couple different paths that didn't really provide much fruit. And then we ended up deciding like, hey, look, you're a recruiter. He's like, why don't you just go find some individuals that might have the skills and the talent and the interest in helping us in this regard. So I found a guy, well, he's now living in Arizona, but he's been with us for a few years now. He's basically our back-end developer. So we had him go out and create for us a unique and proprietary data acquisition tool. So a scraper that's out there and acquiring all of the information in the job board space. So basically the job postings that are out there in a very unique way that, a job posting essentially really is only going to be represented on Climb one time, whereas on these large meta scrapers, oftentimes if Procter & Gamble or Sara Lee posts a plant manager, production manager role, at the end of the day or the end of the week, that job's going to be on there 30 different times, so right. When Indeed's like, hey, we posted 3.2 million new jobs today. And it's like, not really though, so
a couple really. Of those posts.
Yeah, right. So it just makes things very convoluted and frustrating within the recruiting field. And there's a lot of other aspects that it's not just the acquisition of the data that's proprietary, unique, but it's also the way in which users, both recruiters and job seekers, are going to have the ability to interact with that data and help come to those conclusions of the right industries, the right businesses, the right companies, the right roles, the right candidates, things like that. So,
right. Yep.
Hopefully it'll be a job board to put an end to
launch date of something like that. What are you guys kind of targeting for that? Or have you guys even gotten that far?
We haven't gotten so far as to state like, hey, we think we're going to be ready to launch with at least an MVP, a minimally viable product, at this particular date. Because just how we were sort of with the back end and getting started, we're kind of at that same point right now with the front end. So now we have all this data. We have mountains and mountains of data, which is great. But now we really want to construct, what that front end looks like, what the user experience looks like, which I have the user experience mapped out in my mind. Right. But I might have the ability to be creative from a solution or problem solving side, but I'm not like an aesthetically creative guy.
Right. Right.
That's not my skill. And as a matter of fact, I tried to create the mascot that would represent Climb, that people would interact with, like the little AI bot that you would interact with. Right. I tried to do that on my own. It's here somewhere. I'll probably show it to you. But in my mind, it was supposed to be like an anthropomorphized mountain, because Climb has a mountain. It's transitioned to a mountain theme. Initially, it was like a tree theme, and then like with a monkey. But now it's really turned into more of a mountain, because that's how I see all of our careers. It's like a multi-peaked journey. You climb one treacherous mountain, and then that gets you high enough to see the landscape and be like, wow, this is so great that I'm here. But look at that mountain peak over there. So then back into the valley and back into the trenches. And so anyway, so I was trying to create this anthropomorphized mountain, that people can interact with. And I thought I did a pretty good job. And I took a picture of it and sent it to the team. And the immediate response was like, Scott, that looks like the poop emoji. And as soon as he said that, it hit me. And I'm like, damn, it does. It does look like the poop emoji. But whatever, man.
That was your inspiration. You didn't even know it, huh?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, people love the poop emoji. Maybe this will work, Yeah. No, but so we're like, so we need to get with like a creative firm to really help us with the branding, the aesthetic, the logo, stuff like that. Right. So we need that, I think, right now more so even than the user experience. Because like I said, I pretty much have that mapped out in my mind, but we need to get that look and feel down, which is not an unimportant aspect.
That's very important. So, yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
Of course, I would say that, but
well, even if your tool is the coolest tool in the world, but it looks like poop, I'm like, it's not going to attract a lot of attention. Right. So it's not going to provide the value that you've designed it to provide. So.
Now, are you guys building that tool more for like an internal recruiter, external, or is it kind of serving the whole kind of gamut? Or like when you build out, like what is your ideal audience you're thinking that's going to serve mainly?
So I think it's going to provide value to the entire recruiting world. So both external recruiters as well as internal recruiters. I do need to iron out the specific ways that we can partner with the third-party recruiting world, because I don't necessarily want to open it up like, hey, all these third-party companies could come and post their jobs. They can post their internal jobs, but I don't want them to come in and post all their clients' jobs, right? So, because all those jobs are already posted, they're already here. So we'll figure that out. But from an aspect of, a third-party recruiter having the capability to come in and interact with our candidate database and target the specific individuals that might be a good fit for their clients' roles. I mean, all day long, So, awesome. or even if, we get to the point where our methodology and our technology has the ability to be like, hey, come in, put in your job description, tell us what you're looking for, give us this minimum amount of data with respect to the right client, and then hopefully we get to the point where our technology is smart enough to be like, here are the 26 people you should call today.
Right. That's
you don't need to post your job, and advertise it. Here are the 26 phone calls you should make, or whatever that is. And so there are different ways that we're still trying to iron out as to how exactly we partner with the third party world. But I don't want to just be a free for all job board,
Yeah. Well, you're creating something different intentionally. So
right. Exactly.
Awesome, man. Well, definitely keep us posted as to when you guys get a little bit closer to launch, so I can share with the audience, and I'm sure people in my network would be excited to get their hands and try something different out there.
Absolutely. We've got 3 firms right now that we're debating on moving forward with from that creative side. So, of course, I'm leaning towards the cheapest one, because that's the Marine in me. and we're still self-funded, which I was talking to a VC guy the other day, and of course I'm an idiot for being self-funded, right? But at the same time, when it makes sense, we'll accept funding when it makes sense.
Right.
We're not.
Yeah. Well, there's always pluses and minuses.
There are.
Yeah. Work-life balance. You got a couple of, beautiful wife, a couple kids. You've got, recent battle that you just overcame with health. 2 businesses now that you're running. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are you doing to kind of make sure that the things that are truly most important to you are getting the time necessary while you're still kind of building your dream?
I mean, it takes as much focus to balance that out as it does to be successful within any industry. I mean, all these things are a unique challenge. On top of that, with all the madness that's taken place, not to derail the conversation into COVID, because I could talk about that for, a couple of years.
Yep.
But, we also found ourselves, we never predicted that we would find ourselves doing this, but we found ourselves homeschooling our youngest. So our 10-year-old. And at first, that was kind of in response to COVID and masking. He didn't want to mask. And like we were talking about earlier with our parenting strategies, it's like we like to give our kids agency to make their own decisions. I mean, within parameters,
of course,
put the guardrails up there. And it's like, hey, man, if you don't want to mask, like, look, I don't want to mask either. I totally respect that. So you can we'll do the schooling from home this year. And then that filtered into the following year. And now it's filtered into a 3rd year, and so we find ourselves juggling that too, myself and my wife. And so there's a lot on the plate, but, at the same time, especially with everything that transpired with respect to the cancer battle and putting off all that stuff, I take a focus on taking that internal temperature, like how are you feeling? What's going on? What do you really need to do? And fortunately for me, like I grew up to be a pretty boring guy, like I don't have a big need to go out there and party or go to bars. Right. Like one of my best friends, he owns a bar right down the street, man. And I feel bad that I'm not there more often, but it's like, that's just not my thing,
Yeah.
And I love to have some beers, but I'd like to have some beers here at home, and
right.
That's it. So, yeah. So fortunately, I'm a pretty boring guy. We do travel a lot. We take a lot of vacations. That's been one thing that's helped us out. And that the whole homeschooling thing has provided us with a lot of flexibility to vacation when we feel like vacationing. And when does this old Marine feel like vacationing? When it's the freaking cheapest,
Right. Yeah.
So, and when it's cheapest when all the other kids are in school, so it's nice that, we can pop over to Disney in the middle of the school year and we can still keep up with his lessons and, go go ride some rides, and there's nobody in the parks, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, we do things, I think, creating things intentionally, that have some kind of built-in flexibility, which I totally respect the fact that there's not a lot of people have that luxury,
Right.
So I totally respect that. But at the same time, you do need to figure out how to take time for yourself. And I think a lot of companies are starting to hone in on that as well. Like the more comfortable, the more you focus on your staff's work-life balance, the more productive, the happier they are, the more productive they're going to be. And so it makes sense. It's beneficial for companies to focus on that. As a matter of fact, when we had a bunch of recruiters, in a way, I felt like it sort of bit me in the ass, but we had a unlimited PTO policy. And you might think this would be, I started that back in 2014 when we started the company. You might be like, oh, wow, Scott is so forward thinking. But it really ended up biting me in the ass, because most of my staff, they would never freaking take any time off.
Right.
Because it's like if you had a designate who you get 2 weeks per year or whatever it is, then they're like, oh, I got to take this time because I only get 2 weeks. But when you put it as unlimited, take as much time as you want, anytime you want. And then most of the staff, I was like bugging them at the end of the year, like, man, go do something, take some time off, like I'll pay you. And so it was tough in that regard, because people have a hard time managing that. So.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's been so many changes over the last, I feel like 5 years in general, but then I think a lot of things got sped up with COVID, some of them, some of them bad. And
some of them.
Yeah. But I think that there's a lot of positive movement towards exactly that of, like you're saying. I mean, I sit in a seat where I create my entire life. I don't have a boss. I can create, and I also understand that majority of people don't have that. I think as selecting a company or where you're working for, I think those companies that are really fully embraced into work-life balance, because exactly that. I mean, they're seeing COVID showed that, hey, well, working from home may not be as detrimental as we all thought, through these years, right? Making our employees not to commute, and like that's for me. Like when I went on my own journey, it was all based off of freedom, and I was commuting back and forth, an hour each way in San Jose every day, and I was sharing custody of my kids at the time. I was like, this isn't a win. Like, I'd much rather just be at home than on the road. And when I wanted to be with my kids, I just wanted to be with my kids. And so that's really what inspired me to kind of create, what I've created now. But I think it's such a good, important point for, finding those types of opportunities for those that don't have all that, in their own control. Yeah.
Yeah. And all those years I was with Sarah Lee, I was traveling damn near 100%, and I was going from plant to plant and bakery to bakery, and, just meeting people every single week, which, was fun. But now if I think about if I had been there after Peyton had been born, our little guy, and that just really would have sucked. These 10 years that I've had with him. It sucks that I had cancer, and it sucks. All that stuff sucks. But it's like I've had a lot of time, here and with him, and you can't take that back. And I didn't have that same luxury with our daughter.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, and I think that's a way to reframe things. Right. Is you can victimize yourself, and not saying that what you obviously didn't go through was incredibly challenging, but I think the mindset is critically important of like, well, I can either be a victim going through cancer, or I can be a present fighter. And a lot of that time, I think of the energy, and again, this is just my thoughts, but the energy is obviously going to propel more of the recovery than sometimes all the other stuff, right? Some people kind of
100%
pack it in, So being able to like have that perspective of like, oh, I'm, going through this battle, and I get to spend more time with my son, spend more time with my family, probably helped you carry you through that.
No doubt about it. No doubt. I was not, honestly, I don't remember stressing at all. I mean, my poor wife carries all the stress, and I'm like, oh, you got to start chemo. I'm like, cool, chemo, whatever. Yeah. And I was not worried about it at all. And I think, up to your point, I think a lot of that probably played into the success of the treatment, was my interpretation of it and my attitude toward it. So, it's totally fine, man. I mean, that's I look forward to my next round of my next battle of whatever that happens to be,
Yeah.
So If you're not battling in life, then like, what the hell are you doing?
What are you doing? Exactly. What are you fighting for today?
Right.
You know, that's what I ask my clients a lot, often, you know, because sometimes we get into this complacency place, and I think it's always a fine balance, right? Of I don't necessarily believe in the hustle culture, like you got to be grinding all the time or you're a loser, which is kind of a big message out there. I think there's a fine balance, right? That I think a lot of people are after, where it's like, how do I stretch my peak performance, and how do I just be good and I'm okay with where I'm at right now, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I just focus on the value that I can provide to the community around me, whether that's clients of ETA, whether that's my family, whether that's, you know, the recruiting industry with Climb. I mean, how can I enhance the amount of value that I provide? Yeah. And in a way, you know, I love that whole debate too between selflessness and selfishness. And it's like the thing that I think most people miss with that debate is that oftentimes, and this is a product of being an evolutionarily biological creature, is that oftentimes the most selfish thing that you can do is the most selfless thing. So acting selflessly is the most selfish thing you can do, if that makes sense. Because it benefits you the most. And so then you have to ask, like, well, I provided all this value and it benefited me the most. So who did I really do it for? Did I do it as an act of selflessness, or did I do it selfishly? And the answer is, it doesn't freaking matter. You know, it doesn't matter how you interpret it. Just provide the maximum amount of value that you can provide in any given space that you happen to find yourself in, whether you're working for somebody as an employee, whether you're just getting out of high school, whether you're trying to get through college. Just focus on how much value that you can provide to the folks around you. And the better and easier that you can make all the people's lives around you, trust me, the better your life is going to be. And so, you know, that's where I center myself.
I love it, man. I love it. I think we're going to use that right there to wrap this thing up, man. I appreciate you coming on here and sharing everything today, and, you know, being vulnerable and, you know, really honor you for, you know, just allowing me to be a part of your journey and how you show up every day, and you know, grateful for our friendship over the years here.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Like I said, I plan on leaning on you quite a bit more in the future. So,
yeah, looking forward to that. For those that are listening, Scott, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you easiest?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn if you're not already connected to me. Somehow I seem to already be connected to every freaking person on there. I don't know how. Probably because of you, man. I don't know.
Could be.
Could be. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My website, at least for VTA, doesn't really do much. It's just more of a placeholder, like, hey, this is who we are and this is what we do. But it's not an interactive site in any way necessarily. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place. I'm on Facebook too, but you know, I don't spend as much time on there. So
yeah. Well, awesome, ladies and gentlemen, Scott Shearin, and he will be back sharing with us here, hopefully in a couple months, about more about his venture with Climb.
Absolutely,
Scott. Again, thank you so much for being here. If you were listening with us live and you enjoyed the show, please give us a little love, give us a little like, comment, you know, for Scott sharing his journey and the value he brought to the table today. Scott, thanks again for joining me, man.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.